We are anonymous.
A new study released by the U.S. Army War College's Strategic Studies Institute and sponsored by various branches of the Department of Defense, DoD, has revealed what many in other nations have known for years, but has been slow to dawn on the United States itself, that the corporatist U.S. empire is quickly approaching collapse. This empire, composed of U.S. government agencies, corporations, and U.S.-dominated financial institutions, has long sought to create a global order characterized by its subservience to Western corporate dominance that uses the U.S. military and other military organizations like NATO to bring other nations into compliance with its interests. More specifically, the study, authored by a mix of academics and retired servicemen at the Strategic Studies Institute, SSI, and the U.S. Army War College, comments on the U.S. loss of global preeminence, leading to a post-primacy world where major threats to the existing status quo range from long-time rivals, such as China and Russia, to more abstract concerns such as widespread resistance to authority and the uncontrolled spread of information. While this may be the first study where the Pentagon more or less admits that the U.S. empire is fraying at the seams, it is not the first time that Department of Defense has intimated that it anticipates nothing short of chaos in the not-so-distant future. For instance, in 2009, the Pentagon began conducting war games that simulated financial collapse scenarios on a global scale. A few years later in 2014, investigative journalist Nafez Ahmed reported that the DoD was paying universities throughout the U.S. millions of dollars to model tipping points and risk scenarios for large-scale civil unrest throughout the U.S. and the rest of the world. According to Ahmed, the program indicated that the Pentagon was preparing for mass civil breakdown. This latest report is proof that the Pentagon is well aware that the current status quo is unsustainable, as other nations, as well as many of the U.S.-owned citizens, are unwilling to be subjected to U.S. government demands that are not in their best interests. However, as instead of working to resolve the situation in a way that is fair to all parties, the study proposes that the U.S. do everything in its power to maintain the increasingly fragile U.S.-dominated global order. According to the report, top rivals like Russia and China, as well as other nations that have long found themselves in the U.S. crosshairs, such as Iran and North Korea, hold the lion's share of the blame for the U.S. loss of global dominance. While government statements to the public often paint the actions of these hostile nations in aggressive terms that stoke panic, the report is quite candid in its assessment, stating that these countries are threats because they pursue their own national interests instead of those of the United States. This act, in and of itself, is seen as undermining America's position in the global order. The report's authors argue that Russia and China, chief among U.S. rivals, are engaged in a deliberate program to demonstrate the limits of U.S. authority, will, reach, influence, and impact that ultimately seeks to reorder their position in the existing status quo in ways that, at a minimum, create more favorable circumstances for pursuit of their core objectives. Thus, the report plainly states that Russia and China do not pose meaningful threats to American national security, but rather to American political, economic, and social influence, as they are bent on revising the contemporary status quo. Of course, these countries are largely seeking to revise the US-dominated status quo in an economic sense. Russia and China have sought to strategically increase their gold reserves while also setting up alternative banking systems that directly challenge US-controlled financial institutions like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. These moves have limited the ability of the US and its allies to strong-arm Russia and China by threatening their access to these institutions or the SWIFT financial system. The case with Iran and North Korea is similar. the report diverges from public government statements on these two nations, not even mentioning that they are perceived as nuclear threats as the media establishment has inaccurately painted them. Instead, these nations are criticized in the report as blocking U.S. imperial influence in their respective parts of the world. As the report states, at a minimum, they, Iran and North Korea, intend to destroy the reach of the US-led order into what they perceive to be their legitimate sphere of influence. They are also resolved to replace that order locally with a new rule set dictated by them. Though the report is surprisingly honest in its assessment of why these foreign nations find themselves at odds with the United States, its suggested solution brings no surprises. Instead of coming to terms with the fact that it may soon be on equal footing with other nations, the report sees the vast expansion of the U.S. military as the only option, despite the existence of approximately 800 U.S. overseas military bases already. The report, however, doesn't call for just any expansion of the military. Rather, it seeks the creation of a military force capable of overpowering any rival or bloc of rivals so it can allow the U.S. to dictate or hold significant sway over outcomes in international disputes. In other words, the solution to the U.S. loss of dominance is to create a military so powerful that it can bully other nations into submission. This, of course, undermines the Department of Defense's assertion that the U.S. military's primary role is defensive. However, an exceedingly powerful military would not be used just to allow the U.S. to guide international political outcomes. The report also notes that another goal of massive military expansion would be to ensure that the U.S. and its partners enjoy unimpeded access to air, sea, space, cyberspace, and the electromagnetic spectrum in order to underwrite their security and prosperity. It states that the failure of all limitations on the ability of the United States to enter and operate within key regions of the world, for example, undermine both U.S. and partner security. Therefore, countries in these key regions that try to maintain sovereignty over their own borders and territory could be seen, from the perspective of the report, as undermining U.S. security. Such unbridled access to these areas by the U.S. military would also allow the U.S. empire to minimize any purposeful, malevolent, or incidental interruption of access to the commons, as well as critical regions, resources, and markets. As the report notes, such struggles over the US-led economic order and nations who wish to have more of a say in how their resources are used are part of the new era of persistent conflict. One of the key resources that has long driven US military action is fossil fuels, namely oil and natural gas. Russia, along with other hostile nations like Iran and Venezuela, find themselves in conflict with the US as their oil and or gas industries are independent of the US-dominated system. However, in Asia, the situation is slightly different with China's economic power in and of itself a threat to US, particularly its manufacturing sector and large US Treasury holdings. North Korea is rich in coal and also produces significant amounts of opium, another substance that has influenced US military action against sovereign nations in the past. It states that some nations are fighting globalization and globalization is also actively fighting back. Combined, all of these forces are rending at the fabric of security and stable governance that all states aspire to and rely on for survival. Again, the report candidly points out the US military is not just intended to ensure political supremacy, but economic as well, thereby placing those nations who resist US-led capitalist globalization in persistent conflict with the United States. The Pentagon has long resorted to military expansion and similar means to maintain its position as what was, for decades, the world's most powerful military. However, the report's justifications for such expansion are deeply troubling, given that any nation choosing to serve its own legitimate national economic interests is automatically a threat to be countered if those interests conflict with perceived US interests. This may be one of the clearest indications to date that the US government knows that its long-held dominant position is not due to American exceptionalism, but rather suppression of other nations serving their own. often wholly justified, agendas for the betterment of their own people. With the report's frank assessment of perceived risks and its less than agreeable solutions, the document itself provides enough insight into the inner workings of U.S. imperialism to debunk the common myths used to justify it, such as American exceptionalism and the U.S. desire to bring democracy and fight for human rights in other nations. Not content to let its honesty get the better of it, the report proposes what is perhaps the most disturbing solution of all, specifying the Pentagon's need to wage a war against a more abstract enemy, information, particularly inconvenient yet truthful information. Such truthful information was deemed by the report's authors as among the more dangerous drivers of civil unrest and mass destabilization, particularly facts that, while true, are seen as damaging the U.S. global reputation. These dangerous facts are divided into several categories. First are inconvenient facts, which expose details that, by implication, undermine legitimate authority and erode the relationships between governments and the governed. In other words, this category includes all facts which reveal government irresponsibility, incompetence, corruption or crime. Second are perilous facts that involve exposing highly classified, sensitive, or proprietary information that can be used to accelerate a real loss of tactical, operational, or strategic advantage. This category ostensibly includes information revealed to the public by whistleblowers such as Edward Snowden and Chelsea Manning. Third are toxic facts that are true but exposed in the absence of context and therefore sour important political discourse. The exposure of U.S. torture programs or war crimes would seem to fall in this category. The report considers such toxic facts as the likeliest to trigger viral or contagious insecurity across or within borders and between or among peoples. As a result of the perceived danger that truth presents to the U.S. empire, the report recommends that the Pentagon work to thwart the uncontrolled spread of information. Wide uncontrolled access to technology that most now take for granted is rapidly undermining prior advantages of discreet, secret, or covert intentions, actions, or operations, the report warns. Another solution to this supposed problem is the use of propaganda through the strategic manipulation of public opinion, particularly in the United States. Such propaganda is seen of the utmost importance within the U.S. as the U.S. homeland, individual American citizens, and U.S. public opinion and perceptions will increasingly become battlefields. Of course, the glaring oversight here is that the report's authors believe that it is the truth itself that is a threat to U.S. interests and the legitimacy of U.S. empire, not the disagreeable behavior that the facts reveal. Given these particular findings of the report, the post-primacy world might as well be the post-truth world. You see, when we said it was designed to collapse, we told you the truth. When we told you there is a new world order that seeks totalitarian control over the world via a one world government controlled by elite bankers, we told you the truth. When we said their means of control over you and your government is the central banking system, we told you the truth. Your government isn't going to save you, your government is a slave just as you and is being used to further its agenda against you and the world. This elite have frontmen in every level from all 17 intelligence agencies through the House of Representatives to Congress and the courts. They are all bought off with elite money. They start going against the plan of the elite majority, they have their funds pulled and their mainstream propaganda median airtime is then canned and you never hear of them from that point on, because they control them, all of them. Further disobedience earn them a sudden heart attack, plane crash or similar terrible accident and/or crime that will go unsolved. While these documents outline solutions that keep the machine running into destruction, we told you the solution and like above. We are telling you the truth. End the Federal Reserve System. End the Patriot Act. End support for the United Nations and get its headquarters out of the United States. Government must start printing and issuing its own interest-free currency backed by precious metal to circumvent these tyrants of the world. This will loosen their grip of control over the United States and eventually rid the country of them. We must see it through and ensure it gets done. We must then pass laws completely making it illegal for any entity, body of government or president to delegate the nation's monetary system or money supply to any private entity period. Nor shall it delegate it to any internal department of any kind exempt from any laws or regulations outside the government's full control and/or oversight. It must ensure the only entity holding true power of the nation's money supply, or monetary system rests firmly in the hands of the people, not the people via their congressmen but a full national vote of all United States citizens and not a vote of a Congress representing the people. We also need to seek to get the money out United States politics altogether, no campaign funds for contributions, third-party donors or lobbying groups. Any and all required campaign funds should come from the candidates themselves, not through donations of any kind, and every candidate should be able to prove to elections officials that his or her funds were made justly and of their own accord. There are myriad of issues we can all begin to change through peaceful demonstrations, and for humanity's sake, we better start doing them. It's our country, is it not? Are you not the overseer of your country? Do you not have expressed permission to overthrow your government if it became too oppressive as outlined in the Constitution, and replace it with one based on the Constitution, and see to it that it adheres to the Constitution and guard it with extreme vigilance from ever repeating again? We have lost the way. Your government has been hijacked by a ransomware virus, and you're the antivirus. There is a factory backup. It's time you speak up, stand up. These people in government work for you. They may have forgotten that and now look at you like the enemy. However, like a child needs discipline, it's time it learns who the boss and real owners of this country and the world are, and that is we the people. Join us. Or don't, but make sure you do your part. It's our country and it's our world. It doesn't belong in the hands of the wealthy few. We are anonymous. We are legion. We can forgive but we will never forget. Expect us.